Well, there's about roughly 24 hours left before the final votes to suspend 3 senators for up to 2 years will be held. It was an unpopular topic at the Conservative Convention and rated only passing mention by the Prime Minister, but that didn't stop it from being the Monday roar in the House of Commons. That's why we decided to have our MPs join us live in our studio today. Nathan Cullen is the NDP House Leader. Dominic LeBlanc is the Liberal House Leader. And for the Conservatives, Parliamentary Secretary Aaron O'Toole. Welcome to you all. Glad you make it this time, Aaron. Just kidding. I want to get your thoughts on the convention, if I could. I'll start with you, Dominic, because I don't think I saw you out there. Did the Prime Minister in some ways clear the air, if not the Prime Minister, the Conservative money collector, Senator Irving Gerstein? Did you sense there was some clearing up there, or was it just muddied still further?
Oh no, it was heavy smoke. It wasn't cleared up at all, the air, Don. Senator Gerstein said some rather surprising things that contradicted some of what Nigel Wright has been saying, including in sworn testimony given to police officers. So one of the two is not telling the truth. I suppose a criminal trial might at some point, if there's one, clear that up, but it added to confusion. And Mr. Harper missed another golden opportunity to come clean with Canadians. The line that stuck with me was that he couldn't care less what some people thought. I think Canadians care deeply about the fact that the Prime Minister seems unable to tell the truth, and his story keeps changing every time he's asked. We hope he's back in the House of Commons tomorrow.
It struck me that he couldn't care less, but maybe people couldn't care less. I don't know. What are you hearing?
Oh, he should care. But aside from, we're all in a popularity contest, but beyond that, it seems to be the Prime Minister's strength is also his weakness. Stephen Harper has this, laser-like focus, as he talks about often, but when people have come forward and suggested, hey, maybe that's not such a great thing, when Wallen's staff person alerted the Conservatives saying that the expenses were out of control and she'd been treated such and such, she reported that, and the PMO knew and chose to ignore it. When people said, hey, Brazeau's got a bit of a record and he appointed him anyways, and Duffy is Duffy. And so all of this leads back to the Prime Minister's inability to show any contrition, to take a moment and say, this is my responsibility. He's very proud to say that Nigel Wright has taken responsibility. And as Dominic says, the very last voice at the convention was the self-admitted bagman for the Conservatives, a Conservative senator paid for by you and I and the Canadian taxpayers, up there saying to the Conservatives, let's just go raise some more money and pay for some more legal bills like we did for Mike Duffy.
All right, Aaron, you're the man in the middle here. Should Stephen Harper have shown contrition, or did he do enough?
Don, what's clear from my friends on both sides that day after day in the House of Commons, we're probably up to hundreds of questions on this. They're not even following what our government has said. If you actually think back to when the Prime Minister became aware of this, he put a stop to what Mr. Wright was doing. And when he was in Peru, he actually did acknowledge that this was handled improperly. There was mistakes made. And since then, the overriding focus for our government and the Prime Minister has been to make sure that the taxpayer is held whole and none of this would ever happen again. And he's doing that by holding people to account. Mr. Wright, who made the big mistake, is no longer working for him. The Senate is holding its own members to account. We hear about contrition today. Mr. Harper did speak about that right at the beginning of this, and we've actually been working to reform the Senate, and that's really what has to happen here. And at the end of the day, Mr. Duffy still does not appear to even acknowledge what an independent auditor said was inappropriate conduct. So we're trying to keep the taxpayer at the focus of what we're doing.
Well, maybe he didn't say I'm sorry directly, but
well, those are such hard words to say sometimes.
Like Fonzie on Happy Days.
But we were talking about politicians make mistakes. We were talking about Ralph Klein a little earlier before. The mistakes are made, and I think the courageous thing to do is you fess up. They keep saying everyone's taking responsibility. Well, some of the people who knew about this whole scam have since been promoted, gotten better jobs within Mr. Harper's government, and some responsibility on his side would just absolutely go a long way. And I may have missed that moment of contrition. Maybe it happened in Peru or Portugal or Venezuela or wherever he happened to be. But I think standing in front of Canadians, as Dominic said, here's this great opportunity. Right? He's in a friendly room. It's not going to get any more friendly between now and the next election to say, this was my role. I appointed these people. I hired Nigel Wright. And it didn't act right away. This was in the news for weeks and months. And still, he's just he looked over Pamela Wallen's expenses and said they're great. That was Mr. Harper taking responsibility.
I want to just, if I can, with you, Aaron, bring this up. Patrick Brazeau's getting ready, if he hasn't already started speaking in the Senate, to argue one last time that this suspension is getting carried away. He says, it's literally, he's gone through his books and it boils down to $144.67 that he's being thrown out for. Doesn't that sound like it's pretty harsh judgment for a guy that's only put in less than $150 worth of bogus bills?
Well, I think he's making his case, and he can do that within the Senate, and I'm sure he's also participating in the investigation. But it's clear there was independent audits with all three senators that looked at not only the rules but the evidence they were provided by each of the senators, and they made the assessment. And then Senator Karen Young has said, as new leader in the Senate, how would this be dealt with in the workplace? You know, all three of us are lawyers. I'd ask my colleagues to say, how would this be handled? I was an in-house counsel for a few years. If somebody took the corporate credit card and made thousands, tens of thousands of dollars of inappropriate expenditures, they'd be terminated, Don. And it's not due process. There's no presumption of innocence in the workplace. You're held to account by your employer for inappropriate conduct. And that's really what we have here, based on an independent audit.
Let's correct the record. I'm not a lawyer.
No.
No,
Okay.
I know
Well,
it was meant as a compliment. For my
You speak so well.
You're right down there with journalists.
You're so smart, Nathan. We thought you were a lawyer. I think that's what Aaron.
Well, I
had to say.
apologize then for
Dominic, what's your take?
Well, if Mr. Carignan was in-house counsel in an organization and he was dealing with these employees that have fouled up, to use Aaron's example, he's dealt with them in such an incompetent way, Senator Carignan has, that he should be fired as the in-house counsel. He began a process, reversed himself, clarified it, held out ideas that he would amend it, brought it in as a private member's motion, then made it a government motion. I mean, he's ground this thing out in a rather incompetent way. Fact is, at the end of the day, though, Patrick Brazeau doesn't make a very good victim. The idea that Senator Brazeau somehow was only $147, I agree with Aaron. The independent audit found differently. Mr. Brazeau is subject to some serious police investigations, not only for his expense problems, but other potentially criminal conduct as well.
Not exactly.
There are many good reasons for Mr. Brazeau to be sanctioned, but at the end of the day, the Prime Minister's office, particularly in the case of Mr. Duffy, has played a role in trying to cover it up, which I think hasn't sat very well with Canadians.
I guess the final question I want to get to, though, Aaron, is, and Nathan and brought it up earlier, Ralph Klein, I know him, I wrote his biography, but he used to, as soon as he made a mistake, he'd go, I'm sorry, I'm really human, I made a mistake, I'm going to try and do this a better way. And Stephen Harper, you know, should just accept responsibility, should he not, for his staff? And shouldn't he just say, look, I'm sorry, I should have been more on the ball on this thing, I should have spotted this problem earlier, there was obviously more than just one person here, I take responsibility for what went on.
I think the Prime Minister has acknowledged there was mistakes in this, and when he became aware of what Mr. Wright was doing, and Mr. Wright's affidavit in court said he did not inform the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has tried to address it, and what we're doing, particularly now with the move to reform the Senate even faster with a Supreme Court hearing later this month, is to make sure at the forefront MPs and senators are accountable. I was in that caucus meeting, Don, that the Prime Minister refers to. It was one of my first caucuses as a new member of Parliament. It was crystal clear to everyone in that room that the Prime Minister said you cannot claim expenses for things that have not been incurred. If you have, you better address it, or you will not be part of this caucus. We're really the only party that puts taxpayers' money and the expenditure of it at the forefront of everything we do, and that's what he's trying to do with dealing with these issues.
30 seconds left for you.
If that's what they're doing a terrible job of it, because of look at how this has gone out. The Prime Minister's, he wrote a handbook, the buck stops here handbook for all his ministers, and saying whether it's you or your staff, the responsibility is yours. You must own it. You must take full responsibility for things that happen under your watch. Well, I would assume that would apply for the top minister, the Prime Minister. That's him. And like you said, other politicians, we're all humans. Mistakes made, errors of judgment, and just bad things roll into bigger bad things. But this Prime Minister gets up and he pretends he's somehow the victim. At some point, that's going to have to stop. He's going to have to come clean and say, this was my part in this whole disaster.
Last 20 to you, Dominic.
Don, if the Prime Minister's worried about taxpayers' money, he shouldn't have spent so much time with his senior staff and senior senators and ministers trying to cover up the mess that happened in his office. It simply isn't credible to say that the most controlling, dominant Prime Minister in a generation had 13 people in his office and senators and suddenly had no idea for a number of months.
There's another myth for another show. He's not the most controlling person.
Well, you're still new.
You're still in the blue sweater. You're still in the blue sweater period.
These parties never vote off party lines, Don. We have the freedom to vote as we choose, as the record shows.
We will make that for another day.
Absolutely. We'll all wear our blue cardigans then, Don.
I got black on. I didn't.
Okay, coming up after the break, the Big Bang of Cannon.